You pick up your phone, not because a notification pulled you, not because you were waiting for something specific. Before any reason arrived, before any thought completed itself, the device was already in your hand and your thumb was already moving. This happens on average 96 times a day for the typical smartphone user. Most of those pickups produce nothing. No important message. No useful information. Just the screen and the habit and the low hum of expecting something to be there. 300,000 years of human evolution built a brain with one core preoccupation: detecting reward in an uncertain environment. Everything your brain does well, pattern recognition, threat detection, reading faces in half a second, was optimized for a world that rewarded relentless attention to signals. The brain that tracked prey across open plains, the brain that listened for a twig snapping in the dark, the brain that built language to warn other people about threats and memorized the stars to navigate by. That brain is in your skull right now. It has not changed in any meaningful structural way since the Pleistocene. It still runs the same search. Someone figured that out. And then they spent billions of dollars building the territory. The story we have told ourselves about compulsive phone use is a story about discipline. You lose an hour to the feed because you lack willpower. You scroll past midnight because you are weak in a way that more controlled people are not. This explanation puts the problem inside the individual, which is convenient for everyone who isn't the individual. The willpower story rests on one assumption that almost nobody examines directly. It assumes the environment is neutral, that the interface is a passive tool waiting to be used, indifferent to whether you stay or leave, built without any particular investment in what you do next. That assumption was never true, and the people who built the interface knew it wasn't true from the beginning. In 1957, the behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner at Harvard University published the culmination of decades of research on what he called operant conditioning. Skinner had been studying how behavior is shaped by consequences, how reward and its absence change what organisms do over time. He had rats, he had levers, he had food pellets, and through thousands of systematic experiments, he found something counterintuitive about reward and persistence. The rats that pressed the lever most obsessively, the ones that kept pressing long past any rational point, the ones whose behavior looked indistinguishable from compulsion, were not the rats that got a pellet every time they pressed. Those rats developed a steady pattern and stopped when they were full. They could stop. Predictability gave them control. The rats that could not stop were on what Skinner called a variable interval reinforcement schedule. A pellet came sometimes. Sometimes it didn't. The timing was unpredictable. The uncertainty was the mechanism. This schedule produced behavior that was nearly impossible to extinguish. The rats would press and press long after any rational evidence of reward had disappeared, because the possibility of reward never fully disappeared. Most engineers at Silicon Valley startups in 2004 had not read Skinner. They didn't need to. They were running their own experiments with better data and larger sample sizes than Skinner ever had. In 2006, a 24-year-old named Asa Raskin was working at a startup in Chicago called Humanized. He designed a feature he would call infinite scroll, the continuous feed that loads new content automatically as you approach the bottom of a page, eliminating the small but real friction of clicking next page and replacing a surface with a visible end with one that has no end at all. He built it in roughly 2 weeks. He considered it an interface improvement. He thought he was making something easier to use. He was right. He was also building something else entirely. Years later, Raskin would estimate that infinite scroll costs humanity approximately 200,000 hours of collective human attention every single day. He said he felt guilty. He said he hadn't intended to build a slot machine. He said he was sorry. He then spent years trying to undo what he had helped create. Here is what doesn't add up in that apology. If an individual engineer built this by accident, without fully understanding the psychology of what he was constructing, Then how did every major platform, working independently with separate teams and separate code bases, converge on the same psychological architecture? The infinite scroll, the variable notification schedule, the pull-to-refresh gesture that physically mimics a slot machine lever, the like button designed to generate and resolve social anxiety at high frequency, the autoplay function that removes the moment of conscious decision between one piece of content and the next. These features exist across platforms that share no code and were often built by people who disliked each other. They converge because they share a question. Not a coincidence. A question that someone asked first. In November 2017, Sean Parker sat for an on-camera interview with the journalist Mike Allen at Axios. Parker was not peripheral to this story. He co-founded Napster and became Facebook's first president. He was in the room before the room became famous. What Parker said in that interview was not treated as major news at the time. It should have been. Parker said that when they were building Facebook, the foundational design question, the one that came before all other questions, was, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? Not, how do we connect people? Not, how do we create something valuable? How do we consume your time and your conscious attention? That was the brief. Every design decision that followed was an attempt to answer it. Parker called the resulting mechanism a social validation feedback loop. Every like you receive triggers a small dopamine response, every comment, every notification. The loop was not a side effect of the design. It was the design. Parker said he knew it at the time. He said Mark Zuckerberg knew it. He said the engineers who built the system built it this way on purpose because it worked. He also said, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. Not as a warning about the future, as a man describing something he had already set in motion. This is not a leaked document, not a whistleblower speaking anonymously. The first president of Facebook, on camera, identified himself as one of the architects of the manipulation and described the mechanism by name. The theoretical foundation had been in plain sight for years. B.J. Fogg had been running research at Stanford's Persuasive Technology Lab since 1998, studying how technology could be designed to change human behavior systematically. His behavior model, motivation, ability, and a precisely timed prompt described the conditions under which behavior change becomes automatic. Fogg published this work. He taught it in classes. His students went on to build several of the most widely used applications in human history. In 2014, a team of researchers at Facebook, Adam Kramer, Jamie Guillory, and Jeffrey Hancock, published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The paper described an experiment Facebook had already run on its own users. For 1 week, without disclosure and without consent, the feeds of 689,303 accounts were algorithmically adjusted. Some users saw disproportionately positive content. Others saw disproportionately negative content. The researchers were testing whether emotional states could spread through a network without any direct interaction between people. They could. Users exposed to more negative content generated more negative posts. Users exposed to more positive content generated more positive posts. The platform was not reflecting the emotional state of its users. It was constructing one. Calibrating it. Showing people a version of the world most likely to produce the emotional response that would keep them engaged. And those emotional responses shaped what they posted, what they believed, how they felt, without any of them knowing the experiment was running. The paper generated several weeks of outrage. The news cycle moved. The experiment had confirmed what the engineers needed to know. The design did not change. The platform continued operating. None of that is hidden anymore. That might be the part that is hardest to sit with. The confession came in 2017. The internal evidence, 900 pages of documents the Wall Street Journal published in 2021 as the Facebook files, confirmed that the company knew its platforms were producing measurable psychological harm and chose not to change the design, because changing the design would reduce engagement, and reducing engagement was not something the business could afford. The question is not whether this is happening. That was answered in a peer-reviewed journal more than 10 years ago. The question is what it means that the variable reward schedule B.F. Skinner used to make rats press levers compulsively was deployed, deliberately, at a scale measured in billions of people. What it means that the confession came publicly and nothing structurally changed. What it means that you are reading this with a device in your pocket and the uncertainty about what's waiting on the other side of the next notification, not knowing if it will be something or nothing, is not a flaw in the system. It was the first design decision anyone made. You know something now that you cannot unknow. Most people stop here. A few don't.